this is a wonderful first occasion to launch a program, an interdisciplinary program in Stanford between Professor Parvizi's lab and Iranian studies to inquire into what the cutting edge of science, which might be neuroscience, tells us about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in general, and places like in Iran. And we're very, very happy that our launch is with one of the most eminent scholars in the field of primatology, Professor De Waal, and we're going to try to have the conversation about how his research will fit into what the project we have. And we're very grateful that you accepted that invitation.
I'm happy to be there. Yeah.
And thank you, Frans, for being here. And I hope that this is going to give us an opportunity to enable millions of our Iranian fellows inside Iran hear your voice and hear your message very clearly.
Okay.
And I hope one day they will also start reading your books. So we are very delighted that you are here with us, and thank you for accepting our invitation. And we are looking forward to seeing your lecture where you elaborate on this fact. But why is that the case? Why do animals have empathy?
Oh, I think there are many good reasons for that. So the first reason, we think that empathy started with maternal care. So a female, whether she's a mouse or an elephant, she needs to take care of her offspring. So she needs to be sensitive to their emotions. If they're hungry, if they're cold, if they're in danger, she needs to be sensitive to emotions. And that's why empathy is more developed in the female than in the male, which is also true in the human species. And that's also why oxytocin, which is really a maternal hormone, is involved in empathy. If you put oxytocin in the nostrils of humans, they become more empathic. So if the core is maternal care, and then from there it's spread to other relationships. So if you have a social species, like let's say the chimpanzee or the elephant, it spreads to non-offspring. So you also need to have empathy for your friends, and you need to have empathy for those you work with every day. And empathy is always very biased to the in-group. It's more, you always have more empathy for the in-group than the out-group, which is a sort of unfortunate thing, but that's how empathy operates. So I think empathy has a lot of advantages for a cooperative species. And so you should not look at it as something that is only costly, because it also has a lot of benefits.
Can you foresee what it would have been the case if animals didn't have empathy?
Yeah, I think for mammals that would be very hard, because the females need to respond to the signals of their offspring. So if you have animals that, let's say, certain fish, they breed and they have eggs, and the eggs come out and the young swim around, and the parents have no connection whatsoever with the offspring, of course they don't need to respond to their signals. They eat them probably, so they can eat them because they're not involved in the care of them. But in mammals, they're very involved in the care, and so it is a very important thing to be. So there's this early story on the origins of empathy, is that the isolation call of, I think it was Paul MacLean, you know that name probably. He said the isolation call is the critical element. Is that certain mammals, they have a call that they give when they're cold and when they're alone, and the parents respond to that. And that's the origin of the empathic reaction. That's what he said. And the interesting thing is that, because I also look outside of the mammals, is that crocodiles have an isolation call. So crocodiles have parental care. It's one of the few reptiles that has that. They have parental care and they have an isolation call. So I would not exclude empathy in certain reptiles and so on. And basically all mammals, they show empathy because all mammals are sensitive to the emotions of somebody else. So you show the dog, the reason people have dogs and cats at home and not lizards and snakes is because dogs and cats are mammals, and they are sensitive to your emotions and you're sensitive to their emotions, and that's what we like. That's actually also what we like in each other. And so empathy is expressed in, let's say, the great apes by what we call consolation behavior. So if one of them is distressed, so one of them has lost a fight, for example, then others will come over and embrace them and kiss them and groom them. And so that's an act of empathy.
That in the core of animal nature, there is an element of goodness. Do you think this it has been neglected throughout the history of science, and if so, why?
Yeah, I think in the 70s and 80s, especially with the selfish gene and all of this, there was a tendency to say that everything in nature is competitive. The struggle for life is basically competition, and humans and animals are completely selfish. This was the time of Reagan and Thatcher, and so everything was explained by selfishness. And this era has come to an end basically in human society in 2008, when the economy collapsed and everyone saw that an economic system run completely by selfishness is not going to work. And so after 2008, all of a sudden there was more discussion of empathy and solidarity in society. And in science, I would say around the year 2000, we dropped that whole idea and we started to talk about cooperation and altruism and humans being very cooperative and not everything being ruled by selfishness and competition. So that idea is now sort of behind us, and we're now focusing, many scientists are focusing on cooperation and altruism and empathy in us and in other species. And so that whole viewpoint has changed. But when I was a student, which was in, let's say, the 70s, 1970s, everything was competition. And so when I discovered by accident that chimpanzees reconcile after fights, no one knew what to do with that, because I demonstrated that after a fight between two male chimpanzees, they will kiss and embrace each other. And no one knew what to do with that, because it didn't make any sense, because if everything is competition, why would you embrace your opponent? That doesn't make any sense. Now we have reached the point, because reconciliation has been found in many social species, also in dogs and in elephants and in dolphins and so in hyenas and so on. Now we are at the point that if you find a social species that doesn't reconcile after fights, we say, how can they keep a society together if they don't know how to compromise and how to make up? humans have a whole spectrum of behavior, from very positive and good to very bad. And that same spectrum you can find in other species. So some animals, like chimpanzees, for example, they can be very loving and caring and empathic, but they can also kill each other, unfortunately. And so that whole spectrum that we have is visible in them. And so I don't like the comparison of when humans do something bad to say they're acting like animals, because then we using nature only for the negative side of us, which is incorrect. So even in chimpanzees, the males are very dominant over the females. But in captive groups where the females are together, the females have power. And you may have an alpha female who is very influential in all the political affairs. In bonobos, which is our other closest relative, the females are dominant over the males. And they do that.
Why is that the case?
They do that collectively. So the males are not particularly good at cooperation in the bonobo. The bonobo female has more sex than the chimpanzee female. And I think that sort of throws off the males. It's a complex story, but...
Do you think that would be a better model for human society?
No, because they don't have a family structure. And we have built our society on the nuclear family, and they don't have that. The female bonobo has only babies every 6 years. And why is that? It's because she does everything by herself. And she needs to climb through the trees and all. So she has a baby on her, and she cannot have a second one on her. Humans can have babies every 2 years, and a bonobo has it every 6 years.
Do they lactate for that long?
They lactate for 4 years.
That's why contraception.
Yeah, that's
lactation.
a sort of contraception.
Pregnancy.
Yeah. So bonobo females are dominant over the males collectively. If you go to a zoo where they have one male bonobo and one female bonobo, the male is dominant because the male has bigger teeth and has more muscles. As soon as you put a second female in that group, the females are going to be dominant because they do that collectively. And so bonobo society is built on collective female power. And there are many primates where females have either equal, like in gibbons, or there's some species where male and female, you can barely talk about dominance between males and females because they're very equal. And there are other societies where females, at least on occasion, they put the males into place. So the males may be dominant, but on occasion the females go after them.
Somewhere I'm trying to find your quote that in some of the bonobos, I think they use sex to bring down tension.
Yeah.
That one of the mechanisms for reducing the pre-conflict or post-conflict is, they say, let's frolic a little bit let's have a roll in the hay, and after the roll in the hay they are less, which goes back to essentially to the 70s again. The hippies, the hippies that free sex, the Wilhelm Reich theory, sexual politics, that if you liberate a society sexually, you will eventually liberate it politically, and you seem to say that that's the way.
That's the way bonobos do it, yeah. Now, of course, bonobos don't have a family structure. In humans, that's a bit of a problem. We have a male, female, children family structure, which is not completely compatible with free sex everywhere.
Tell us a little bit more about sexual freedom and animals.
Yeah, so bonobos would be the best example because they have sex in all combinations, not just male-female. It's not just, it's female-female, male-male. They have all combinations.
Are they happier than other animals? What would you say?
I think they're happier. The males are not dominant. The females are dominant. They're very close to us. Bonobos are just as close to us as chimpanzees. The females are dominant, and people often say, oh, those poor males, because they're dominated by the females. But actually, the male bonobo lives a longer life than the male chimpanzee. The male chimpanzee is completely dominant. So male bonobos don't have a bad life. They have a lot of sex. They live longer. They're just not dominant.
Will there be any way of practicing goodness without obeying the religious rules?
I think so. So goodness in itself is nothing. I think I'm not sure what it means. So you always ask, good for whom or good for what? And goodness in a sort of absolute sense, I don't think exists. So take, for example, the sense of fairness. We do these experiments on primates where one monkey gets grapes for a task, and the other one gets cucumber for the task, and grapes are much better than cucumber, and the monkeys prefer grapes. So the one who gets cucumber will get very upset because it's an unfair distribution of things. So the monkeys already have a sense of fairness, and chimpanzees go even further. Chimpanzees, which are not monkeys, chimpanzees are apes, and have much bigger brains than the monkeys, and chimpanzees, they will even react when they get more. So I get grapes and you get cucumber, and I will refuse my grape till you also get a grape. That's what the chimpanzees do. So the sense of fairness, which we often think that's good, the sense of fairness is good, we think it's very functional. We think it is, if you have a cooperative society where we do things together, we work together very often, we need to watch what I get and we need to watch what you get. And if the difference gets too big, you get all the good stuff and I don't get the good stuff, I need to look for another partner, or I need to leave, or I need to protest. I have a sense of fairness and I'm going to protest against you because I get too little out of the relationship. And so we look at it in very functional terms, even though you may say fairness is good. I would say fairness is good for cooperation. It's good for something. And that's true for everything that we call good or bad. That is good for this or it's good for that.
So tell us about universal ethics.
Is there universal ethics?
But does it have to be through religion?
No, I don't think so.
So ethics outside religion, can you tell us about that, based on your understanding of the animal behavior?
Yeah, I think ethics and morality relates to creating a harmonious and cooperative society. That's the main goal. Because ethics and morality ask us to think a little bit less about our purely selfish individual interest and to think more about the community. What is good for the community? So ethics and morality push us to become more cooperative beings than we normally would be, maybe. And that's true for many of the primates. They have many mechanisms to keep cooperation going and to reduce their own selfish involvement in everything. So I think religion is sort of secondary to all of this. Religion came in later, very recently, and probably appropriated many of these mechanisms and started to translate them into stories that we listen to inspire us to become even more moral beings. And so there are explanations of religion, I don't know if you know those, but there are people who say that religions arose only when we started to settle down and become agricultural, because we had possessions and there was more competition over possessions, and the societies then got bigger, and our primitive morality that we had could not handle these big societies. Because morality, also in the primates, works between individuals who know each other. I know you, and I pay attention to what you do, and if you behave badly, I'm going to be more friends with him than with you. And so that's how morality actually operates in real life. But if you get 1,000 individuals together, or 1,000,000, you cannot do that anymore because you don't know everybody. And the thinking is that our current religions came in to fill the gap and to make it possible to have these large-scale societies, because you had a God who looked at everybody and saw everything, and the principles apply to everyone equally, and that's how the big gods are associated with the big societies, basically.
But in the book you say that religion essentially comes, if I remember correctly, 100 millennia after the first signs of morality. So how do you determine what the baseline is? What is the first indications of morality?
Well, I think we see the first signs in other primates, like in chimpanzees and bonobos. I don't think they are moral in the human sense, because they don't try to justify their rules and things like that. But they are pro-social, they are empathic, they have a sense of fairness, they cooperate. So they have all the elements that are important to human morality. And so I think 200,000 years ago, or maybe 1,000,000 years ago, our ancestors probably had moral systems. Our ancestors probably would exclude someone who murdered somebody, or would exclude someone who was unfair or unjust. And so we had moral systems of right and wrong. And our current religions, they are only a couple of thousand years old. So they came much later. And that's why I'm saying that morality, the source of morality, cannot be the religions that we have. Our religions are maybe compatible with it, and maybe they support morality, but they're not the source of it.
But if empathy is one of the basic instincts, and having compassion for another human being or another animal simply because they're animal. Organized religions, on the one hand, give us empathy, but on the other hand, they give us antipathy towards people who are not like us. So how does this, where does that come from?
That's the bad thing about religion. Religion, I think, is good for morality in that it provides a narrative, as we call it, a justification for why we should be moral. And it sometimes it provides incentives, like if you're immoral, you're going to hell, so you better be moral. You know, so religions help, I think. But religions also incite violence. Religions also tell you to kill the opposition, and which is not a good thing, I would say. And so religion has a very mixed record in this regard. So on balance, that's a bit of my question. On balance, is religion good or bad for morality? And then it's not 100% clear, I think.
Yes.
Well, my main message in almost all my books is continuity between humans and other animals. So people try to divide us from them, but basically humans are animals, and that's how I look at them. More specifically to the issue of morality and religion, and which is in my last book, my message is that I don't think morality comes from religion. I don't think the two are incompatible. I don't think they're enemies necessarily, but I don't think religion is the source of human morality.